Hello, everyone, and welcome to Classical Revolution here on IDAGIO. My name is Rachel Fenlon, and I'm the host of this weekly series. Today, I'm joined by bass-baritone Gerald Finley. Gerald is a leading singer and acclaimed dramatic interpreter with acclaimed performances of the world's major opera houses and concert stages. His immense discography includes Grammy award-winning recordings in a wide variety of repertoire with all of the major labels. His career is devoted to the wide range of vocal art, encompassing opera, concert, orchestral, and performing and working with the greatest musicians, composers, conductors, and orchestras of our time. Please welcome Gerald Finley. Hi, Gerald.
Hi, Rachel. Hi.
Thank you so much for being here. It's so nice to have you on the show.
I'm delighted to be here. Absolutely delighted.
And you're joining us from England?
Yes, from my home in Tunbridge Wells in England.
Lovely. Welcome. I'd like to begin the episode by just asking what your earliest introduction to music was and whether there was a particular musical moment which led you on your sort of lifelong musical path.
Well, I think probably the thing that I remember about music in my life, and the first memory that I have of it, is having classical music played while we ate dinner, and it became sort of a family ritual where one of the kids would choose the record. I mean, I wouldn't. I have three older sisters, and so they were always the ones choosing the music, pretty much. And it was something that was just part of kind of the natural flow of things. I think we only listened like to 10 minutes or one side of a 33 third RPM.
Okay.
But I think that's where I heard my first Beethoven 5. But the other things that went on the record player when I was really young were little children's events. I mean, not to mention Peter and the Wolf, Fantasia, that sort of thing. That was playing kind of in and around my house. Also, Woody Woodpecker, for anybody who knows what Woody Woodpecker was about. Great songs like "Carrots Grow from Carrot Seeds," that sort of thing.
Okay.
So that was the sort of imprinted really early on in my young days. My first kind of real musical interaction with anybody, I had moved from Montreal, where I was born, to Ottawa in Ontario in Canada, and I went to a thing called it was a little ORF method, ORFF method, and it was basically percussion and everything. And just the other day, actually going through some files, came across a report to my parents from the ORF teacher saying, yes, Gerald can bang out a tune with great gusto. So I was already doing some pretty active things when I was about 7 years old.
Wow. Okay. And so what was sort of the path then specifically to singing and to vocal music?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was kind of a serendipitous that I had moved from Montreal to Ottawa, because in Ottawa there were two very well-renowned men and boys choirs of Anglican churches there. One was the cathedral in Ottawa called Christ Church Cathedral, and run by Godfrey Hewitt, who is the father of Angela Hewitt.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, an uncle of mine, actually an uncle of my father's, was the organist and choral director at Westminster Abbey here in England. His name was William Mackay, and again, serendipitously, he retired to Ottawa with his wife, my father's aunt, and he sort of knew that there was this wonderful place called St. Matthew's Church Choir, run by a young Englishman called Brian Law. And I went, and my father said, I went kicking and screaming, saying, I don't want to, this is ridiculous, 2 rehearsals a week and service on Sundays, I'll never see my friends, all that. And he said, give it 6 weeks and I've been singing ever since.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So really, so from a choral place.
Oh, absolutely. So I
Yeah.
sang in St. Matthew's Choir and joined and was very, very highly involved in the choral music scene in Ottawa. It was the time of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was investing very highly in the arts and culture in Canada at the time. And Ottawa, as the sort of focus for federal activities and programs, benefited a lot. We had the newly commissioned National Arts Centre, and
Okay.
that was unbelievably helpful because it was a place where choirs, local choirs, could go and support either the music from the newly formed National Arts Centre Orchestra, children's choirs certainly. There was a big opera house new, and so touring companies came and they needed local children to fill in. So I got involved in all of that, took part in the music festivals as a soloist, right through until my voice changed, and then joined all the youth choirs that were going, and Ontario Youth Choir, uh, the Ottawa Choral Society, the Cantata Singers, all that of Ottawa, and I was enjoying life so much, and the National Arts Centre Opera Chorus as well. At the age of
Okay.
18, I joined them, and then when I was 19, the horizons changed completely, and I came to England to pursue a choral career.
Okay. Oh, so it wasn't originally as an operatic soloist or a solo career.
Well, yes, I mean it was a preparation, I suppose, musically
I see.
to do that. I had hoped to come to England to train as a choral director,
Okay.
uh, and to the Royal College of Music, then auditioned for the King's College Choir in Cambridge, which is an undergraduate choir, and got in. Couldn't believe it. But then my solo opportunities began to mount up. I sang a wonderful St. Matthew Passion with the King's College Choir. Dame Janet Baker was one of the soloists. She encouraged me from pretty much that first meeting. She's been influential in my very early career, certainly, and then finished off at the Royal College of Music with solo and opera work through there.
Okay. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was a
Um,
it was a big steer away from the choral directing into solo singing. I sort of
yeah.
discovered that my voice was keeping me much more active, and I wasn't actually a very good conductor. So yeah.
Well, that doesn't stop most people. Just
No.
kidding.
There's a story in five.
I was chatting with friends today in a rehearsal, and I was telling them that I was having you on the show tonight, all singers or musicians, and everyone had some favorite recording or some favorite thing of yours. And I was standing there and I realized, how amazing is this that we all have a different contrasting favorite thing of yours? I mean, it's quite rare that you inhabit this opera world, this chamber music world, this song world. And so I started to think, I would love to ask you about that. And where do those worlds for you come together? Like, where do they intersect? And where do they diverge? And do they fulfill different parts of you? Because you seem at home in these things. So,
Yeah, well, yes to all of that, I think is the answer. I mean, I've felt really since I was in the choir as a boy that singing was something that led you into all sorts of different experiences. Yes, I began in the sort of the Anglican, English cathedral music system, but then we would put on concerts of Fauré Requiem and Haydn masses.
mhm.
This church choir in Ottawa, we hired a little orchestra. Once a year, we kind of put these things on. And so my exposure to other singers, professional singers, was from the age of 10. So I could hear what they were doing. And then as my choral chorus work progressed to opera, I mean, I was on the stage with John Vickers and Frederica von Stade and all the great Canadian singers of that time, Edith Weens, for instance,
Mhm.
and Maureen Forrester, of course, she was part. And so I was introduced to the sort of multidisciplinary opportunity for even just a boy in a boys' choir. That I could see that these were all ways that you could make a living. And of course, then what happened was that someone said, "Oh, you're interested in singing? Have this recording," and it was Fischer Dieskau singing Die Schöne Müllerin, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was just like, how is this? How is this contact? This intimacy? This purity of sound? This man sounds heroic and yet sensitive, and yet, you know, I don't know, just he seemed to do things with his voice which drew you completely in, and it was a huge influence on my teenage years from that. And in fact, I really tried to balance the art song, you know, German Lieder and obviously French Melodie, and you know, from my very, very earliest days. And in fact, I have the farewell recital that I gave when I was 19 to the great and good people of Ottawa. I think there were probably 25 people in the audience. But I started with a Bach aria. I then moved to Sarastro and Papageno, and then sang all of Dichte Liebe, and sang Vaughan Williams' Songs of Travels. I mean, it was just a salad of things, but it actually is exactly how my career has, you know, unfolded. And I love every element of it.
Yep. That's very interesting that at 19 you kind of
Yes, people would call me indecisive. So yeah, why don't you just choose? But I felt that really, if I could inhabit any one of those vocal disciplines, and actually, you know, there was great sort of, you know, things in my ear going, well, you have to make a career as a musician, and you have to be make sure your rut is very wide in terms of what your capabilities are.
Yeah.
And, you know, I wanted to kind of feed on well, I mean, it's just, of course, all that music is just phenomenal.
Exactly.
You know, and, but it's really helped me along the way. I mean, I know my Bach and I know my Britten, and I know so much in between. And the thrill actually of coming to England was and to the Royal College was to encounter young composers, and they, you know, they would write stuff for people to do. And so, you know, I really was, I sang in King's College Chapel some music written by George Benjamin, for, you know, a play that was being put on in the chapel. And that was so exciting, thrilling. So, you know, from the oldest to the newest, it's been such a wonderfully invigorating time.
Is it ever difficult, or is it ever difficult to transition between, I mean, because you have also logistically, you have such a busy schedule, and going between, you know, say a major operatic part and a song recital. Have you ever found that transition difficult, or are you just able to inhabit them?
Yeah, everything's difficult.
Okay.
No, really, everything's difficult. You know, trying to, I mean, and in many ways, it's been the holy grail for me is to find how is it that I could use the material that I have in myself to be the same singer in all of these disciplines. And I spent a good part of my middle career really not feeling as though that was happening very well. And, you know, I mean, the ups and downs, the frustrations and all of that have really led me to have a later life quest. I'd like to think it's the middle part of my career now. Um,
Okay.
and I learned a lot in the first bit of my career, and now I'm understanding that actually I really have to learn how to sing. It's really important that I now devote myself to all those technical things that eluded me in the major part of my life. So I'm a bit of a technical geek at the moment.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, really trying to figure out what is going to stabilize the voice so that I get another half a career out of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So yeah, some of the younger opera roles may elude me now. I think Billy Budd probably has gone, maybe Guglielmo too. But you'd be surprised, people still ask for some
Really?
of the young stuff, which is great, of course. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been difficult. It's been difficult, and on occasion, if I've been doing an opera role, and then tried to do a recital either within a run of performances or shortly
Hmm.
after, that has really, I mean, I've really had to kind of declutch. It's really difficult to learn and
Yeah.
prepare a recital while you're singing, say, Massenet or even Mozart, say at the Met, where you need a fairly strong presence. But for me, of course, the challenge should have been get your singing sorted out. Because if you got your singing sorted out, you wouldn't mind about all this other stuff. Of course, the other thing is, finding the stylistic stuff and making
Yeah.
sure that whatever you're doing at one time doesn't necessarily conflict. If you're doing a bel canto role or say, Guillaume Tell, making sure that you're not necessarily trying to learn a Schoenberg piece, because
Right.
just because of I mean, someone would say, and my teacher would probably say, well, you should sing Schoenberg as you do Rossini, and he's actually got a point. But in the times that I have been trying to struggle to put it all together, it's demanding. It's
Yeah.
demanding on your mind, on your whole your body involvement. How do you relax enough to just absorb the new styles? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's been fun though. I have to say, in retrospect, it's been fun.
Yeah.
Difficult but fun.
This kind of it reminds me of a quote of yours that I read in Opera News, and I'm gonna quote it, which
Yeah,
is it's a great quote. If you don't know how to sing a song, you don't know how to sing. And then you talk about it's all about song, and that's what my whole life has been about. How do you sing the perfect song? So I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand with what you're saying about approaching it.
yeah. I think. Well, yeah. I would modify that quote probably now
Right.
if I were to speak about it. I would say, sing? How can you sing a song with your best voice, which allows the song to live?
Mm.
And because that's all we're doing in arias, that's all we're doing in any kind of dramatic situation. You're just expressing the connecting with the musical emotion that the composer has has offered you, and you have to be smart enough or sensitive enough to understand what those emotions are. But then you have to allow your instrument to be free enough to allow the composer's wishes to be had. And I think that's, for me, that's an ongoing challenge
Mhm.
for me now. Rather than be too intellectual about it, it's really just to let the artistic side of me bloom a bit,
Mm.
knowing that I have a voice which will work at at, at whatever intensity that it needs to. And
Yeah.
I think that's really the thing about the song. Song is, just you, the composer, and your reaction to the music. Um, and I think that's the relationship that I've always enjoyed the most.
Mhm.
Just seeing the music on the page and thinking, I'm feeling this, I can relate to it. What I would really love to do is to just allow my, um, the butterfly in me to just float off and go with the waves of what the
Mm.
composer has done.
Oh, I love that. Um, and as an interpreter, which, you know, you're one of the foremost interpreters, I would say in art song as well as in opera. Um, do your interpretations themselves ever change with repertoire, with the same repertoire?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't sing as many recitals as I would like to, because I think if I did, then I would sort of be able to track a journey. for, how I did it once and how I grew through it, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, my touchstone is something like The Marriage of Figaro, for instance, where
Okay.
I've sung both the Count and Figaro. And I'm constantly astounded at how much I hear new, how much is suddenly kind of that really is revealed suddenly with a different conductor or a different orchestra or and me as a changing artist, of course, you become more sensitive to various things, and yeah, I think oh yes, I almost feel that once I've sung a song, I have to let it go because suddenly it's got that life, and that was that life for that particular moment, and I don't know. I think it's kind of the joy of being an artist is suddenly this freedom that you have the potential to be your own artist and interpreter at any time,
Right.
and you react differently to poetry depending on what even the weather is like,
Yeah.
or what issues you've had in your life. Um, and I think I think that's one of our um, greatest blessings as singers and interpreters to encounter this amazing poetry, which has incredibly influenced these composers and made them, create a vehicle by which we, as performers, can allow our life experience to guide those interpretations in whatever way. Oh, it's, of course I could say, well, my first Dichterliebe at 19 was pretty different to the one that I recorded, 7 or 8 years ago. And yet I would call them both valid. And, even the great Fischer Dieskau, I mean, how many recordings of Winterizer did he do? Wasn't, it was always testing, always re-examining, always, well, just really feeling anew, having a
Yeah.
different perspective. And I must go on about Fischer Dieskau. He was a big burden on my shoulder for very, very many, many years, and I felt that was, but in recent years, many more what I would call of the bel canto style singing of leaders. Really, I've enjoyed the singing much more and enjoyed the freedom of the voices and things as well. So, although he was a primary influence in my early days, I have many, many more now.
Yes. And speaking about recording, that was another question that I was curious to hear your thoughts on was, because you're recording so much, how does it affect or change an interpretation of a piece? Do you feel like it demands something different of you or the way you analyze it, or?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. There's two parts to this answer. The first is what is being listened to? What is the sound world in which someone is actually listening to you perform? And that's much more controllable, of course, with my own personal recital discs, because you get to set the sound world and intimacy, which is really the point I'm wanting to say. Obviously, recorded performances of orchestral or of opera work, that's much more about kind of making sure that the drama is getting through the microphone.
Mhm.
And sometimes, even though one can feel in one's own self, oh, I'm working really hard here to give over the impression of, either being a Swiss national hero or or a cruel cad like Don Giovanni. Actually, if you don't really go and listen, then back to what you're doing, to increase, if you like, the intensity of those performances. Because sometimes if someone's blind and just listening, not seeing a visual part of it, then you have to work much harder in terms of really convincing the through the microphone to someone's heart.
Uh-huh.
So that's that. But I would say that the other thing is that in my recital disc performing, you know that there's an intimacy here, and you can use, if you like, the pleasure of a studio where there's no other distractions, where there's this controlled ambiance, and so you can get very intimate. Any sound technicians, of course, will understand what I'm trying to get at, where you can put the microphone much closer. I always felt one of my greatest influences vocally, this is going to sound unbelievable, was Karen Carpenter.
Okay.
So Karen Carpenter, you can hear the saliva going around in Karen's mouth when she's listening to the radio in her songs by the Carpenters. And to me, that was just like, it was almost intrusive to be that close to someone's, it was like she was whispering. And I found that so beguiling in some ways. And so I've been very interested in whether people are closely mic'd or whether there's a much bigger sound around them. And obviously for intimate Schubert songs, or any of the art songs, in fact, I try and find a way to balance the what's in one's ear, particularly actually English repertoire, because obviously songs like by Charles Ives or Samuel Barber, they have a directness, and you have to be careful about being a bit too, what I would call, too singerish in that regard. And I did fall into the trap a little bit about becoming a bit too intimate with the microphone on some of that. And if you translate that to the concert hall, you're finished.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's that another relationship with an audience that's live as opposed to someone who's just listening with their ears. That's there are some things to really consider.
Interesting. It's so interesting, actually. And has there ever been a particular circumstance where you recorded something and it made you think about the piece you were recording in a different way in terms of the content of the piece itself?
Oh, definitely. Yes. Oh, yeah. And in fact, I think that's one of the hardest things about, say, doing a song cycle. Say like Winterizer. I recorded that 6-7 years ago now, and that I had done a tour of that in North America, and felt that there was a very good, consistent sort of approach to it. And we went into the studio, and by the end of the second day, it was like we've got no idea. We have, the sound world was different. Again, it was about trying to get through to people's ears. What would they be listening? How did I want to sound in this journey? I needed it to be a complete journey and not just individual songs within. And and my wife will complain that every time I hear a recording that I've just recently recorded, I'll say, this is, how did I even say yes to this? Why did I think it was going to be any worth that I should do something like this? It's full of terrible, anyway, of course, as it coalesces and you forget about the tension of the recording, circumstance, and then I normally say, okay, well, we'll let that go, but I really want to do it again.
Well, you can. I mean,
yeah, I know, but I don't want to do 7 versions of Winterizer because I won't be satisfied anyway.
Exactly. Something I wanted to explore when I started this series was talking about the idea of rule breaking in music, rule breaking as a classical musician. And so I wanted to ask you how that translates to you. Have there been, I think we all create our own rules and break them, or the composers create rules and we break them. And I am curious what do you think about breaking rules?
Yeah, well, I'm not really the great one to ask because I was brought up pretty much to obey rules and try and follow the path. But I made my path really wide. I think, what we talked about before about this kind of wide-ranging activity. And I mean, one of the greatest people that I worked with was Nicholas Harnoncourt.
Okay.
And he was all about what he felt music allowed the human being to express. He said there was always limitations about what was on the page, so that any performance of any work of any sort would never really be the ideal performance. So what you had to do was invest in those areas, in the moments that you felt you could really wring out the intensity of a circumstance. He was the one who pointed out that rests were as much a musical idea as any written notation, so that the breaks between the audible sound could be as dramatic, could be as poignant, could be as intimate, could be as vigorous, aggressive as the music. And you know, when he first suggested that, it was like, wow, when we're talking about Schumann here, you know, and but he really made me start to think about actually the continuum of, you know, what we performers have to achieve from the beginning that we walk out and present ourselves on the stage to deliver a piece, that actually we have to pay as much attention to the silences as we do to the music.
Yeah.
And that was really convincing. I loved that yeah, I mean, it felt radical, but also he completely changed one's view of what, you know, what metronome marks were, what speed was. He said he said, I am a conductor, so I can tell you how fast I want this to go. He said, because sometimes I want to get an energy which cannot be within the metronome mark that the composer has done. And to support that, there's a very good quote from the second performer of the Brahms's four last songs.
Okay.
So it wasn't Julius Stockhausen, it was the second performer, and he performed them in front of Brahms. And because he couldn't handle the way that Brahms had marked the final page of the songs, which is actually a very demanding part for any singer, he actually ignored some of the dynamic markings and kind of made it end in a very huge, you know, in a triumphant sort of way. And he sort of meekly went up to Brahms afterwards and said, you know, I'm really sorry, Maestro, that I wasn't able to follow the instructions that you have for that song. And Brahms said, I didn't notice anything amiss. And it's like, okay. So composers are allowing us to use what we are as artists. Yes, they're putting it out there, and yet one wants to honor their mission. Of course, that is absolutely my modus operandi. I must honor what is presented to me. Of course, they're generally much smarter and have experience with the poetry or whatever that I could never assume. I have to come on board and respect that and honor it. However, I'm also an artist. I need to have an interpretation or an energy to be able to do that. So since that time when I've read that quote, that's only some 5 or 6 years ago now, but I would encourage anybody to absolutely to feel that the best of themselves as performers is the thing that we experience as audiences, because that's the thrill. That is why we love our singers, or should love our singers, because they're allowing themselves to fly free.
Yep.
So yeah, that's an ambition of mine for the next part of my life anyway. Fly free.
Fly free. I love it. And I mean, no, also just this idea, I mean, and you've done a lot of premieres. I mean, you did this amazing Dr. Atomic with John Adams, and where you actually created this incredible role.
Yeah.
And you must have had that experience too, where I've certainly had that experience with composers where actually sometimes I've even changed a couple of the notes on the page, and then I say, I'm sorry, in the rehearsal, I changed that because, and they said, I didn't notice that. That's fine.
Yes, I think, well, yes, because we're collaborators. Come on, you know, we
exactly.
absolutely are part of, you know, a continuum of history and of current events and of, you know, pushing towards what life experience will be in the future. I mean, You know, we are taking part now in performances that will be remembered by some generation. Sometimes they're noted, you know, and preserved. You know, you think about it, we've only had recorded music for about 100 years.
Yep.
And it's been a great thing, and it's been a big hindrance as well for our ideas of pushing forward. So
Yes. I had a guest a few weeks ago, a composer, say, and this stuck in my head since then. He said, and we were talking almost exactly about this point, that, you know, we're now at this 100 mark year of recordings or time, and that it's almost now we're forced into a period of transition, and we don't quite know where it's all headed, but it can't live where it was, you know, and it's an interesting time in a way.
it is. I think one of our challenges, well, perhaps a new generation of performers will encounter the challenges greater than I will, because I'm still part of the, you know, show up with an orchestra or other musicians and sing to a live audience. I mean, that's been my whole life.
Right.
And, you know, currently, you know, it's a disaster. So catastrophic, I think, is
Yes.
perhaps even a better word.
Yeah.
And we're all, you know, biding our time patiently, thinking, okay, it's not happening now. People are still planning for things to happen. Thank goodness. I have that optimism that even though my calendar is now decimated, that, you know, the plans that I do have for the middle of next year and onwards will come to fruition. But that's a huge hope. One of my first agents actually said, look, a contract is only as good as the final note of the performance.
Oh,
And
wow.
and
Oh.
anything can happen up till then. So it's like nothing's guaranteed. Okay, those of us that have been fortunate enough to have a fairly steady career, you know, you do get a sense that oh, this is different time. But there are many of our colleagues who have always thought, okay, where's the next job coming from?
Yeah.
I don't know where my horizon is. You know, I have to invest in my art, but I have to keep myself alive as well. How do
Yeah.
we do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's you know, I think in some ways, even from the busiest professionals to the people that are either considering going into music college now, we're all bound together suddenly. Maybe the students are better off because they're actually doing things and, you know, being trained. And I'm so excited for them that once we break through, or once we understand what's next,
Yeah.
that
It's
yeah,
going.
things will happen for them.
Yeah. 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 It's no, very, very interesting points.
Yeah, no, I would say, I mean, just to go back to working with someone like John Adams or Kaya Saariaho or Eino Juhani Rautavaara, it's just the thrill of working with a contemporary artist as well. You know, having this unbelievable relationship with a composer who is formulating and
Yeah.
using, and in current times. I mean, I've been very spoiled to work with those people. And as I mentioned, George Benjamin early on, and I remember because we were at the same college together, and he I remember him running out into a space George didn't normally run, but he came out and said, "I can't believe it." He said, "I've written a C major chord in root position," and it's like this was a very dynamic. It's just a dramatic thing in his life that.
Oh my gosh.
This young composer had finally written, you know, a tonic chord, and well, anyway, so I admire, and these are the people that we need now. I mean, music for our time, music for
Yeah.
our experience, and yes, we can reach back into the past, and there are great pieces that we're, you know, going to feel that are very powerful. I mean, you know, Beethoven 9 is an obvious. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
been an obvious helper through many crises in the last, you know, half century. But
Yeah.
you know, as a unifying piece of music, it's one of the big ones. Let's hope that something out there is going to unify us again.
Wow, I love that.
That's my.
It's been such a pleasure hearing your thoughts, and thank you for taking the time to share so many ideas. And
Well, I mean, for me, it's about the future.
yeah.
And, curmudgeons like me will have
Stop it.
our attitudes towards, what should be doing right now. And what I want to do is enthuse those people that, perhaps can't see, that the horizon is a bit too close at the moment. That that students, finding the end of their terms or their ends of their training, first of all, I would say training never ends. First of all, always listen to the person that has the ears outside of you, and keep growing as artists. Keep living. Yeah, it's tough out there, but then everybody's experienced toughness now, and we have to embody that. And when we allow ourselves now the communication privilege of being in front of people again, and some people are in this circumstance, I have hope. I really have hope. Who knows? I mean, my own situation, I have hope that things will get going again. But I hope for my colleagues as well, that we don't fall off, and that we need absolutely to have as loud a voice as, in appealing to our controllers, shall we say, our international and political leaders, that we won't be silent for much longer. And they're going to hear us pretty loudly, whether they like it or not. So let's keep at it, I would say.
Let's keep at it. And let's keep inspiring the hope, because I share the hope with you, and I think a lot of us do, and we just have to keep that. That's also a very, very strong thing.
Yeah, for me too.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gerald.
No, it's been a delight. Thank you for letting me witter on about
I could have you witter on for much longer. And to everyone who tuned in, also, I curated a playlist today based on all of my favorite Gerald Finley recordings. So definitely check that out as well. It has some beautiful gems, some Bach and Britten and Vaughan Williams and Mozart and Iago, Otello. I put everything on there.
Great.
So thank you again, Gerald.
Great. And it's been nice to visit.
Yes, you too. Wishing you well, stay well, and have a nice autumn. And see everyone else next week.